Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined by my partner in crime, Wes Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. Wes, just a few days away now on this short week, Sunday night football from San Francisco, Santa Clara, California, Levi's Stadium. The Packers will be visiting the 49ers. Important game here in week 3, and wanted to get your thoughts initially on this 2021 49ers team that is 2-0 with victories over the Lions and the Eagles. And I guess in short, this is a Niners team that is looking a lot more like the one from 2 years ago as opposed to the one from last year that was just ravaged by injuries.
Yeah, I mean, they're more complete. I mean, other than the backfield, which is
right now the running backs, they've got an injury situation there for sure.
But as Matt LaFleur even said during his news conference on Wednesday, much like it's been underneath Kyle Shanahan, they still find ways to move the football regardless of really who's in that backfield. You know, Jimmy Garoppolo, I thought, has played really good high-percentage football here early on. We obviously saw Trey Lance have that touchdown pass in the opener. That's going to continue to be a storyline for them. But let's be honest, since the very beginning, since the day that they really started becoming more of a power in the NFC, it's been based around their defense. It's been based around, protecting the football. And I think they've gotten back to those principles. Now, certainly they have, one of the top 3, maybe top 2 pass rushers in the game right now in Nick Bosa. There's a lot of guys that they can turn to in addition to a defensive scheme that they still have a lot of confidence in, despite the fact Robert Saleh moved on to New York. So last year, I think that they largely view that as an anomaly. Everything that happened, they basically had the kitchen sink thrown at them from an injury standpoint.
Yeah.
This year, they're hoping that, other than that backfield situation, which has been in flux, that they're back to having their main weapons offensively.
Yeah, and one of those is tight end George Kittle, who was one of those guys going down with an injury last season. And Packers obviously know that regular season game out there in 2019, George Kittle was a big difference maker, big-time playmaker. He's one of the top tight ends in this game. And statistically so far this year, Deebo Samuel, through 2 games, 15 catches, 282 yards, including a 79-yard touchdown. Those are pretty good numbers for the first quarter of a season, and he's got that through 2 weeks here. So he is definitely another go-to guy there in the passing game for San Francisco.
Yeah, and when they drafted him, Mike, I think the general consensus is that this guy is going to be a perfect fit for the type of offense that Shanahan likes to run. And as you've seen, I mean, the ways that they can use him, how explosive he is. He's not, he's still a 6-foot receiver too. I mean, I don't want to throw comparisons into like the Devontae Adamses of the world, but you can see how he's so well-rounded that I think it's really going to make him a dangerous weapon in this offense for years to come. And certainly Jimmy Garoppolo, as you mentioned, with the 79-yard touchdown pass, has found that comfort zone with him. And that's been important, right? Because as you said, Kittle, for being right up there in the conversation as a top 2, top 3 tight end in this league, has been off to a slower start with some of his stats. You lose Raheem Mostert. Now you have Elijah Mitchell's dealing with the shoulder injury. Samuel has been the constant for them right now offensively. And as I mentioned as well, the fact that Garoppolo, for everything that has happened, for all the conversations about Trey Lance or, these multitude of quarterbacks they might be looking at this offseason, Garoppolo's kept it very simple. He stayed very focused and obviously has found a really good offensive weapon for himself.
Yeah, and on the defensive side for the 49ers, really, other than the last, 6 minutes of that Week 1 game against Detroit, this has been a defense that has played pretty darn well through the first 2 weeks of the season. The Lions did not do much offensively until very late in the game. The Philadelphia Eagles never really got their offense going against the Niners last week. Now they're actually at home for the first time in 2021. This will be their home opener coming off of 2 road victories. And on the Packers side of things, up front, the Packers have some questions here to answer on the offensive line because Elton Jenkins, he missed Wednesday's practice with an ankle injury. Now, obviously, the injury cropped up on Monday night. Wednesday, getting back on the practice field on a short week. It's not unusual for guys to miss there, but we just have to see how the rest of the week plays out, if Jenkins is going to be able to go at left tackle or if the Packers have to make adjustments. And then they're still deciding on what to do at left guard as well, whether you go with John Runyon or Lucas Patrick. And you have the 2 rookies, Josh Myers and Royce Newman, who will be playing really essentially their first crowd noise game in the NFL. Now, these guys are not strangers to crowd noise, having come from the big-time power conferences in college football, but still, this will be an adjustment, another one of those steps along the way for rookies on the offensive line for the Packers. There's a lot to sort out up front to get this offense where it needs to be to beat this 49ers team.
Well, and this is this first week after we noticed on Wednesday that Elton Jenkins was the only one not practicing. It's the first time there really has been any questions at left tackle for Green Bay, and that is a remarkable luxury considering you lost a 5-time All-Pro and David Bakhtiari for the first 6 games of the season as he comes back from the ACL. Jenkins has been that darn good. He hasn't been without flaw, but for a guy that is a left guard by trade, the transition he's made and some of the pass rushers he's seen these first 2 weeks, you have to tip your cap to him in the job that he's done. That being said, beyond Jenkins, there are a lot of questions there. I mean, Josh Neyman is a guy that has been here now for 2, going on 3 years, but has been a real long-term developmental project for them. Physically, has all the tools you look for. I thought at the left tackle position really benefited for how many reps he took this offseason, but still has really never played in an NFL game extensively beyond some snaps at the end. You also have Dennis Kelly available. He had the knee injury at the end of camp. He's had some traditional experience at left tackle, although he's played mostly on the right side, played on the right side last year for Tennessee in 17 starts. There are options, but when you're going from talking about all pros and Pro Bowlers, this is a scenario which Packers were really lucky that a lot of other teams aren't, that you've been able to luck into Elton Jenkins. So we have to see how the week goes there. That being said, the different packages, Bosa, Fred Warner, the amount of playmakers that are on the San Francisco defense. Mike, I've been covering the Packers for 9 years now, full-time on a basis. This is my 10th season. Every single gosh darn year, they have had linebackers, they've had pass rushers, they have had different coordinators, and yet they've been able to maintain that standard. DeMeco Ryans is doing that now with this defense. Still a lot of the same principles you see from Robert Saleh, but they're getting after it, man, and they have some pretty talented guys to do it with.
Yeah, so let's get down to business here. What are the keys to victory for the Packers in what is going to be a very challenging road game? Let's start on the offensive side of the ball. What's it going to take here for the Packers to emerge victorious?
You're going back to the Bay Area. I think you got to get in the red zone quick, and I think you got to put up some points. Defensively, you hope that the Packers have turned a corner. You saw the adjustments they made in the second half against the Lions, being able to get a little bit more pressure on Jared Goff. I think they found something with Eric Stokes. I don't know what the plan is going to be moving forward with how you get him on the field more, but he played well on the perimeter. I thought it was a really good option across from Jair Alexander. But at the same time, this is about offensive football, and when you go on the road, you need your offense to set the tone. You talked about the crowd noise. You need to be able to take the crowd out of it. What is probably going to be a very energetic atmosphere inside Levi's Stadium. That's where I think it's on Aaron Rodgers. I think it's on this Packers run game. It's on Devontae Adams. Last week, even though it wasn't a picture-perfect start, the fact that they came out with that 11-play drive for 75 yards and got in the end zone, I really feel like that's what allowed Green Bay to stem that tide early on defensively and then ultimately take the momentum from there. I'm looking for points early, I'm looking for production early, and I'm looking for the Packers to shorten up this football game.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think a fast start offensively. Even after the Monday night victory over the Lions, Matt LaFleur said it, Aaron Rodgers said it, a fast start really on both sides of the ball, but particularly offensively, I think the Packers feel like they have to come out and set some kind of a tone on offense. They know they've got to get the ball to the playmakers, starting with Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams, and then you work in the other complementary pieces, Robert Tonyan, MVS, Allen Lazard, whoever that might be, A.J. Dillon getting some opportunities when Aaron Jones needs a breather. But it starts with 33-17 with 12 at the controls, and it really feels like the Packers cannot afford to go one or two possessions at the start of this game without getting some points on the board, because otherwise it feels like it could turn into a really long night.
It really does. And that's where, if you look at San Francisco, while they did obviously give up some production late against Detroit, that's been the commonality here in these early games, is just how they've set the tone with what they've done defensively and kind of allowed the offense to find its rhythm from there. And realistically, I'll say it again, Mike. I really love what San Francisco has done with their defense. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of Seattle from a number of years ago where, okay, where you have your big 3-4 big playmakers, But they augment that. You have a D Ford in there now as a rotational guy. You know, Eric Armstead, Josh Norman's on this football team. I mean, they have depth and experienced depth at positions, in addition to the guys that are really your headline makers, the guys that are helping you with, you know, kind of cultivate a really strong defensive presence. That, to me, for Green Bay, I think you got to find a way to break that. You have to find a way to do it. The times in which Green Bay's been successful against San Francisco over the last half dozen years, it's been when offensively they've been able to put 30 points on the board. You know, and if the defense steps up and they get off to a fast start this week for Green Bay, fantastic.
Yeah.
But offensively, when you're going on the road and you're playing in front of 70,000 people, I think that's what's required in order to really set your own tempo.
Yeah, absolutely. On the defensive side of the ball, some fascinating matchups and decisions and whatnot to watch here as far as how Green Bay handles this game. You mentioned already with Stokes. What are the Packers going to do with Stokes? What role is he going to have now that he went from just playing a handful of snaps in the opener against the Saints to playing 40-plus snaps and having a much bigger role in the defense in Week 2? So there's that. Do you just match up Jair Alexander on Deebo Samuel for the entire game? Do you match there, or do you have Alexander play sides? Again, another question that we'll have to see how they answer it. And then what do you do against George Kittle? Because Juwan Johnson for the Saints at tight end, 2 touchdown receptions in Week 1. TJ Hawkinson, who really is the key target for the Lions in their passing game, didn't have any huge monster plays over the top or anything like that, but a very productive game, and he got in the end zone as well for Detroit. So the Packers have given up some tight end production, and now here comes George Kittle into the mix. And, you can certainly play a bracket coverage type of thing on Kittle with a linebacker in front and a safety behind.
Yeah.
We saw the Packers doing that in some instances against Hawkinson. But if you do that, obviously you're sacrificing somewhere else defensively, and those are the decisions you have to make. Where can you sacrifice if you want to try to take George Kittle out of things, or at least limit his production?
It's an excellent point you raise, and Green Bay, they want to get more from their pass rush, right? That's been sort of the statement here the first couple weeks. Green Bay could have a really strong pass rushing performance in this game. It still might not be enough just based on how San Francisco's offensive line is built. I mean, they have 2 of probably the best at their positions in the last decade in Trent Williams at left tackle, Alex Mack at center. You have Mike McGlinchey at right tackle. I mean, and obviously Laken Tomlinson's a guy, too, that has been in the league for a long time. They've only given up 1 sack this year on Garoppolo. So what does that mean? That means that you're hoping for the best from the pass rush, but you may need to cover. You may need to plaster. You mentioned the 2 biggest question marks, I think, for Green Bay heading into this game, beginning with Kittle. Because to me, this reminded me of the old Morgan Burnett games, where it's like you take Morgan Burnett, you put him on the tight end, and you give him some help occasionally, but that's going to be his assignment for this game. We called it the hybrid nitro, whatever you want to. That was the thing.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a game where you see either a Savage or an Amos matching up with him. Maybe you do have Devondre Campbell with some cloud coverage over him with the safety help. Those are all things you have to think about. But as you mentioned with the bracket looks, that's where Samuel can hurt you. That's where these running backs can hurt you. You can only have so much attention devoted to one player. The Jair Alexander matching up thing, I'll believe it when I see it. It
Right.
Still hasn't been a thing. They just like leaving him on his spot, and you basically take away that side of the field. It's the old Richard Sherman kind of logic, right?
Yep.
That being said, that is always something they have in the back of their hand. I think Jair Alexander could be an elite star nickel slot corner in this league. He just so also happens to be an absolute demon as a boundary corner as well. So all things Green Bay has to consider, but certainly I think this is a big game for coverage, Mike. I think this is where the cornerbacks, the linebackers, the safeties are going to earn their paychecks, because you just can't be guaranteed anything against this offense and the way and how quickly they get that ball out.
Yeah, and you mentioned the pass rush, and that'll certainly be a key here as well. We saw how things changed so much first half to second half against the Detroit Lions on Monday night, as far as not only the pressure the Packers were able to generate on Jared Goff, but also the different ways in which they were doing it. There were more change-ups, there were more surprises. It wasn't just the standard looks, I guess, so to speak. So it'll be interesting to see how many other wrinkles and change-ups do you throw there. But again, as you know, and as I just mentioned with Kittle, if you send a fifth rusher, right, that you're one guy down in coverage. I mean, it's a numbers game at the end of the day. It's 11 on 11. If you send a fifth guy, you better make sure somebody gets home and somebody speeds up the quarterback's clock because you're down one in the back end to try to take away a potential big play. So this is really an interesting game because it feels like the 49ers in a lot of ways have already, other than their running back situation, but it feels like the 49ers have already kind of figured out who they are after going through all the injuries they did last year. Now it feels like they kind of have their band back together and they're back to being those 2019 49ers. And the Packers with a new defensive coordinator, and they're working in a rookie first-round pick at cornerback. They've got 2 rookies on the offensive line, some other questions up front like we talked about. The Packers are still trying to kind of figure things out here, and this is a really, really tough road matchup here in Green Bay for Green Bay in Week 3.
Well, and just to give some credit to these backs too, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of scenarios. You saw this happen in Baltimore where 18 different running backs go down and they had to make the moves that they did. What has always impressed me with San Francisco is they find these guys, and Matt Breida and Jeff Wilson and obviously Raheem Mostert was the one they sort of finally settled on as their back.
Yeah, they run so much misdirection and so much of the window dressing and everything. They try to get defenses to essentially focus on the wrong thing. They try to distract your eyes. They try to get you looking in the wrong spots, and then all of a sudden some running back you've never heard of is slashing you for a 15-yard gain, and you're like, where did that come from? It's like, well, it's because they're really good at the distraction game. They really are.
So even though you lose Mostert, and then you have, whether it's Trey Sermon is a guy that, I think he's coming back out of the concussion protocol, I believe, JaMychal Hasty. I mean, they have guys, Mike, that just you can't guarantee. There's so many times where it's like, okay, well, they're down 3 backs. They're on their 4th guy that was elevated off the practice squad. We feel pretty good about stopping the run. You never feel that way against the 49ers.
No, you don't.
They're going to be able to throw multiple looks at you, and they have guys that can hurt you outside. It's a brilliant offensive scheme. Defensively, its blueprint has been put out there for years now, what they're looking to accomplish. Devontae Adams even talked about it, where they aren't going to see probably as many too high looks this week because those defenders are confident with what packages they have that whatever they see, they're going to be able to adjust to it. So it's going to be a great game. It's going to be great Sunday Night Football television, and certainly for Green Bay's perspective, need to go and get this win on the road here because they're really looking at 4 of their next 6 going to be taking place outside of Lambeau.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a little bit of sponsor business here, Wes. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7. 365. And it's getting close to lunchtime here, Wes. At Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, we believe in better. All right, I suggested this as we wrapped up our last show, and I want to take a look at this because the schedule, the NFC North matchups this week, across the board are fascinating. You obviously have the Packers playing the 49ers on the road. The Chicago Bears, the Justin Fields era, which we knew was inevitable, but it's starting a little earlier than probably everyone thought. The Bears will be on the road at Cleveland, taking on a Browns team that certainly feels like it should be 2-0 because they had the Kansas City Chiefs on the ropes in Week 1, but were not able to pull that game out. Baltimore is traveling to Detroit, and Seattle is traveling to Minnesota. So after Week 1, the NFC North was a little bit of a laughingstock with everybody losing. The division was 0-4. Okay, so you've got the Niners, the Browns, the Ravens, and the Seahawks as the division's 4 opponents this week. If the NFC North wants to make any kind of a statement that they aren't some run-of-the-mill division, this is a week to try to get some notice, right?
This is the week to do it. I just on that fast track at Ford Field, I wonder what that defense is going to have for Lamar Jackson.
Oh my goodness,
that could be a long football game. You saw Kansas City's had a really good scheme here for a number of years since Andy Reid basically committed themselves to rebuilding that defense about 4 years ago, and Jackson's running all over the place on them. And for Detroit, they do have some linebackers there, but with how banged up they are, that's going to be an interesting one. Chicago's the one that, to me, that is going to be the headline-making game because I think everybody pretty much agrees that Cleveland's going to be a contender again in a really good, AFC North division. They're a team to watch. Okay, so what is Chicago going to be able to do with this here? You come out of the gate, things don't go well, you bounce back. I don't know what you thought of Fields last week. I think he's incredibly talented. I think he's going to be a good quarterback. I see everything that Ryan Pace saw in him to draft him where they did. it seems like Bears fans are running to this young man as the savior. I was kind of the one from the beginning going, there's a reason you have Andy Dalton there.
Yeah.
Now, I will go back and I will tell you when they drafted Mitchell Trubisky, I was like, let that guy sit all year long. I think we could tell that he was far away. Fields seems a lot more NFL ready than Trubisky did.
But he's still got a ways to go.
So
you could see. I mean, he made a potentially just killer mistake in the fourth quarter. There, they had their defense had pretty much put that game away against the Bengals, and Fields turns the ball over and gives the Bengals a shot to get back in that. You can't make mistakes like that. The Bears offense really just didn't do much with Justin Fields at the controls. Now, with Andy Dalton being hurt now, he's taking all the reps in practice and everything like that. So those kinds of things change the equation. But going to be a very tough road game, I think, for the Bears going to Cleveland with a interesting matchup, though, that Bears defense against a Browns offense that's put up some points. And then Minnesota playing at home. This will be the home opener for the Vikings, but they're looking to avoid 0-3, and they've got to take on a Seattle Seahawks team that is, stung a little bit by the fourth quarter comeback by the Tennessee Titans, and Tennessee ended up stealing that game in overtime in Seattle last week. But the Seahawks still in a very tough NFC West, like we talked about. Seahawks are still very much a contender, and Minnesota going to do whatever it takes to try to avoid 0-3.
This is kind of a stretch on a comparison here because they're different types of coaches. There were different types of success before they hit a kind of a skid. But what Minnesota's going through right now really reminds me of like what the New Orleans Saints did in like that early part of the 2010s. And what I mean by that is it's such a grind for them to win football games right now. Now, obviously the Saints, they'd won a Super Bowl. Sean Payton was so celebrated, still is. So everybody was willing to wait through it to see what they can get on the other side. You look at it where Minnesota's at, it just seems like every single week, it doesn't matter if they're playing the top team in the NFL or the last spring, they're just in a barn burner, and there's just one or two things that don't go their way, and here they are at 0-2. I mean, Mike Zimmer is an excellent coach. I'll put him up there, Mike, honestly, outside of what the Packers have offered, is probably the best guy the NFC North has produced from a head coaching perspective in the last, 15 years?
Yeah.
Conservatively?
I would agree.
But their defense, they've been trying to rebuild this thing. Offensively, Kirk Cousins looks great. He doesn't look good, looks great. The consistency factor outside of Delvin Cook has been the big question mark for them, and they are not going to have an easy opponent against the Seattle Seahawks coming into their house.
It's a crazy thing about this league. You mentioned it. The Vikings are 0-2, but they were this close in each of those games from winning them against the Bengals and the Cardinals. So close to being 2-0. Yet they're 0-2, and they have a really, really tough game for their home opener in Week 3 to try to avoid that 0-3 start. But a big week overall for the NFC North with these matchups against NFC West and AFC North teams.
Yeah, and if I could say this too, I mean, it's a great week if you're the Green Bay Packers. You can get a win. I mean, you have the Buccaneers beating up on the Rams. I mean, there's a lot of good Eagles and the Cowboys. Only one of those teams is going to walk out with a dub. So I mean, it's a good opportunity if you can find a way to get this win in San Francisco with the NFC North facing these opposition. Some of these NFC teams kind of beating up on each other. So you start to find a way to kind of pull away from the pack here in the first quarter of the season. It's as good of a weekend as any.
Yeah, definitely a chance to make some noise. So with that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team and everything with Sunday night's big game from San Francisco. We'll have it all for you on Packers.com. For Wes, I'm Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.